Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Dragon Prince Yuan Season 2 episode number 30 based on novel. So let's start. After hearing his story, Yaoyao's pretty face seemed to ripple slightly. Does the 9 dragons canon require dragon-type Genesis Beast Essence blood? Zhu Yuan nodded. But I can only buy high-tier grade 4 dragon-type Genesis Beast Essence blood from the Glittering Jewels Pavilion, which is less than ideal. The 9 dragons canon I end up with will be weaker too, said Zhu Yuan. Yaoyao suddenly smiled as she cocked her head, her fine black hair seemingly pouring downwards, revealing on half of her gorgeously pretty face. Then this is really not much of a problem. She looked towards Zhu Yuan as she lowered her voice. I have a method to make your high-tier grade 4 essence blood even better than grade 5. Zhu Yuan's eyes widened as he asked in bewilderment, really? Yaoyao forcefully nodded her snow-white chin, before she reached out her hands, covering the Tuntun's ears under Zhu Yuan's puzzled gaze, as she softly said, let me tell you a secret. If you mix Tuntun's blood with the essence blood of those high-tier grade 4 dragon-type Genesis beasts, you can raise their quality. Zhu Yuan's feet instantly froze in place as he swallowed and looked straight at Yaoyao. Yaoyao grinned slightly and said, you cannot tell Tuntun that you heard this from me. Zhu Yuan took in a deep breath, before displaying his kindest and friendliest smile, as he took the dazed Tuntun from Yaoyao's arms. He gently caressed it as he said in a tender voice, little cutie, want to go to the 100 Fragrances house? I'll be treating, eat as much as you want. The light of desire instantly shined in Tuntun's beady beast eyes. At this current moment, Zhu Yuan seemed to have suddenly become extremely grand and amazing in its eyes. Tuntun was exceedingly smart, and possessed high intelligence. Hence, it naturally understood Zhu Yuan's words, causing it to feel a little awkward, using its tiny paws to cover its eyes. It knew that Zhu Yuan was only given 30 Genesis jade pieces a month. If Zhu Yuan did not have any other income, this meal for Tuntun would be worth several years. Do you want to constantly enjoy such meals too in the future? Zhu Yuan continued to entice. Tuntun vigorously nodded its little head, its eyes practically glowing. Zhu Yuan revealed a warm smile as he said, if you want to eat such meals regularly, I'll have to first have enough Genesis jade. That's why I need you to do me a tiny little favor such that I will be able to obtain even more Genesis jade in the future, and let you regularly have great, sumptuous meals. Tuntun was taken aback. Soon after, it somewhat warily looked at Zhu Yuan. It had sensed a faint hint of danger by instinct. On the balcony, Yaoyao bathed in the rays of the sun with an ancient text in her hand. Her pupils glanced towards the inside of the house as a slight angle rose from the corners of her red lips. Zhu Yuan gazed at Tuntun as he retrieved a tiny little jade bottle from his sleeve and said with a faint smile, it's actually very simple. I just need a tiny bit of blood from you. All the hairs on Tuntun's body stood on end. It curled up its body and barked at Zhu Yuan. This fellow wanted its blood. If you can't even help me with this small favor, I'm afraid that we'll no longer be able to enter the 100 Fragrances house in future, said Zhu Yuan in a calm voice. However, the threat within his words was extremely clear. Hesitation flashed across Tuntun's beady eyes. It was evidently violently struggling inside. Do you want to eat stuff like the sumptuous meal you just had, or is dried meat better? Won't it be regretful if you can't ever go again? Zhu Yuan's words were filled with temptation. In the end, Tuntun let out a pained wail, before it dejectedly extended a paw, evidently no longer able to resist Zhu Yuan's enticement. A grin cracked opened from the corners of Zhu Yuan's lips when he saw this. The heavenly Yuan brush began to grow, its snow-white hairs flickering with a sharp cold light. Zhu Yuan channeled his strength, the brush tip transforming into a flash of light as it ruthlessly thrust towards Tuntun's paw. Sparks flew when the sharp brush tip landed on Tuntun's scaly paw. However, it had only made a tiny dent, unable to pierce even the tiniest little hole. Zhu Yuan was dumbstruck. This defense was way too strong. Tuntun cast over a disdainful gaze. I let you cut, but you can't even cut it open, so useless. Zhu Yuan's face turned hot as he muttered, my heavenly Yuan brush is only a mid-grade black-tier Genesis weapon. The 4th rune just refuses to awaken. He raised the brush again, and took in a deep breath. Genesis chi surged along the brush, converging into a purple aura at its tip. It was the aura flare technique. The brush tip whizzed forth once again. It finally worked this time, cutting open a tiny hole on Tuntun's paw from which fresh blood immediately dripped out. Zhu Yuan hurriedly stretched forward the bottle to catch the drops of blood. Only now did he discover that Tuntun's blood had a deep gold hue. Every drop seemed to be extremely heavy, while giving off a mysterious sensation. So heavy. The hand holding the jade bottle sunk slightly. Tuntun's blood was exceptionally heavy. This truly is the good stuff. Zhu Yuan licked his lips. His senses told him that Tuntun's blood was extraordinary. He immediately grabbed Tuntun's paw and squeezed it tightly to make more blood drip out faster. Hence, after a few minutes, Zhu Yuan was finally able to fill a bottle. However, he could not help but lick his lips as he swiftly fished out another bottle, eyes seemingly burning as he said, "A little more, a little more." This was such a hard-to-come-by opportunity, he would get every last drop he could. Roar. However, Tuntun released angry roar in response to his actions. Its paw suddenly raised and mercilessly swung towards the loathsomely greedy Zhu Yuan's chest. Thump. A muffled thump was heard, followed by a miserable cry. Zhu Yuan's figure was thrown backwards, smashing one of the windows of the little house as he arced across the air, before crashing into the ground with a yell of pain. On the balcony, Yao Yao lifted the ancient text in her hand, blocking her gaze. She was not going to look at this terrible fellow, who was now suffering the consequences from trying to take advantage. Zhu Yuan lay on the ground, hand clutched over his chest as he crawled up. The first thing he did was check that the bottle had not been broken, before breathing a sigh of relief. Next, he shook his head and said, "Petty fellow, it's just one more bottle." He massaged his painful chest. Tuntun had been too vicious. But at least I got it. He gently swiveled the bottle in his hand as a look of joy appeared on his face. It was as Yao Yao had said. Tuntun's blood would make the high-tier grade 4 Genesis Beast Essence blood. He had become comparable to grade 5. "What are you doing?" While Zhu Yuan was elated inside, a lovely voice suddenly rang out from the side. He raised his head and saw Ji Yu Hongi standing nearby, her pretty face filled with confusion as she looked at him. Zhu Yuan kept the jade bottle and grinned, "Nothing." He then asked, "Why brought you here?" Ji Yu Hongi hesitated for a moment, before she said, "I heard that you went the Glittering Jewels Pavilion to purchase Genesis Beast Essence blood for the 9 Dragons cannon, but ended up being beaten to it by Lu Feng." Zhu Yuan's expression was calm as he nodded. He managed to buy up all of the grade 5 Genesis Beast Essence blood. Ji Yu Hongi lightly clenched her teeth as fury flashed in her eyes. She had only despise for Lu Feng's actions. She suddenly jerked her hand, throwing a black shadow to Zhu Yuan. Zhu Yuan caught it in surprise, feeling a cool sensation as it entered his hands. It was another jade bottle, a wild and berserk aura spreading from the viscous blood flowing within. Grade 5 Dragon-type Genesis Beast blood. Zhu Yuan was startled. "I managed to pull some strings to get it from the inner mountains, but I only have one," explained Ji Yu Hongi. Zhu Yuan was rather astonished, evidently not expecting Ji Yu Hongi would help him obtain such an item. He immediately shook his head. "No need." Ji Yu Hongi waved her hand, cutting him off. "No need to be courteous. The grudge between you and Lu Feng is ultimately due to me. I will not stand by and do nothing." She looked at Zhu Yuan and suddenly laughed as she teased, "I've heard that you told Lu Feng you would take away number 1 from him in the peak selection ceremony. Word has already spread. Many are laughing at you for overestimating yourself." Zhu Yuan was speechless. He had not expected news of this to spread so quickly. Looks like it was because of Lu Feng again. "I'm not the type to stir up trouble, but he's provoked me time and time again. It won't be me if I don't throw a punch back." Zhu Yuan chuckled. "Why, do not fancy my odds. Rationality tells me that your chances are not good." Ji Yu Hongi's red lips pouted slightly. "However, I do hope to see you snatching away first place from him." Zhu Yuan nodded. "I'll accept those well wishes then." Ji Yu Hongi was a direct and efficient individual. With a wave of her hand, she turned around, stepping on Genesis Chi, as she cast her gaze back towards the little house by the creek. "Work hard. There's not much time left to the peak selection ceremony. I for one am really looking forward to your performance." Her voice echoed within the mountain. Zhu Yuan watched her figure disappear, before he began to swivel the bottle of grade 5 Genesis Beast Essence blood. He peered into the distance, iciness filling his eyes as they narrowed. Lu Feng. Taking away the essence blood means that there exists some wariness of me in your heart. Hence why you would resort to such methods to ensure nothing goes wrong. However, if you believe this will be enough to hinder me, I can only say that you're too naive. During the peak selection ceremony, the number one position you're so fixated on will be taken by me. The bright moon hung high in the sky, while a seated Zhu Yuan bathed in its gentle glow. 3 jade bottles stood in front of him, a savage and violent aura pulsing from the blood-red liquid within. They contained the essence blood of 3 high-tier grade 4 dragon-type Genesis beasts. As he gazed at the 3 bottles of essence blood, Zhu Yuan briefly fell into thought, before he retrieved another bottle. Inside this bottle was gold blood that shined with a mysterious luster under the moonlight, a faint peculiar roar seemingly echoing from it. Tuntun's blood seemed to contain a mysterious power. I wonder what kind of creature Tuntun is, to think that its blood can raise the quality of other Genesis beast essence blood. Mumbled Zhu Yuan to himself. Tuntun was just like Yao Yao, filled with mystery. It was not only overwhelmingly powerful, but also wielded a terrifying devouring power that seemed to be capable of devouring anything. Such a frightening ability was clearly not something an ordinary Genesis beast would possess. It was rumored that grade 6 Genesis beasts had intelligence that did not lose to the human race. What's more, some Genesis beasts with powerful bloodlines possessed amazing abilities that even the numerous powerful experts of the human race did not dare to underestimate. Tuntun's origins were clearly not ordinary. Zhu Yuan shook his head, scattering these messy thoughts. The important thing now was to test if Tuntun's blood was able to raise the quality of essence blood like Yao Yao had claimed. Zhu Yuan began to concentrate, one hand holding one of the bottles of Genesis beast essence blood, as the other very carefully dripped golden blood into it. The moment the golden blood entered the bottle, its contents abruptly began to boil. Golden light spread, infusing the originally blood-red essence blood with a faint golden glow. At this very moment, Zhu Yuan felt the surrounding Genesis chi begin to converge towards the bottle. The blood-red essence blood boiled as a faint bloody mist began to rise. The mist ultimately took the shape of a tiny python silhouette and released a soft hiss. The savage aura from the blood also steadily strengthened. Joy surged in Zhu Yuan's eyes when he saw this. As expected, Yao Yao had been speaking the truth. Tuntun's blood was indeed able to raise the quality of Genesis beast essence blood. According to his estimates, this Genesis beast essence blood was now not the slightest bit inferior to the grade 5 essence blood from the Glittering Jewels Pavilion. This was an upgrade of an entire level. How terrifying! Zhu Yuan involuntarily gasped. Although it was only a single bottle, one could already see how amazing Tuntun's blood was. If Tuntun was eaten by a grade 6 Genesis beast, the beast would likely advance to grade 7, or maybe an even higher grade. Zhu Yuan swallowed as his expression turned grave. Looks like this information had to be kept secret at all cost. If not, it would surely draw the attention of many people, something that would be extremely detrimental to Tuntun. One must know that a grade 6 Genesis beast was already equivalent to a human divine dwelling expert, while the divine dwelling stage was considered elite even in a behemoth like the Tsangshuan sect. As for grade 7 and grade 8 Genesis beasts, they were existences that even the Tsangshuan sect would not dare to offend. I should start refining the essence blood, and begin practicing the 9 dragons canon. Without further ado, Zhu Yuan slammed his hands together, shattering the jade bottle. Red liquid rose, transforming into 2 thin streams of blood that were sucked into Zhu Yuan's nostrils. The pungent scent of blood assaulted his senses, nearly making him puke, but Zhu Yuan forcibly pushed down the urge. Rumble. The Genesis beast essence blood immediately began to rebel the moment it entered his body, a savage aura spreading with the intent to invade. However, Zhu Yuan was prepared. Genesis chi flooded over from all directions, surrounding the essence blood to prevent it from causing any harm to the body. Rumble. The essence blood charged with all its might, making the insides of Zhu Yuan's body shake violently. The savage aura continued to rise, stirring up vexed feelings in his heart. Red appeared in his eyes as the desire to destroy began to engulf him. However, the moment this urge rose, the spirit between Zhu Yuan's brows began to vibrate as a cooling sensation spread, allowing him to regain his senses. It is indeed dangerous to refine Genesis beast essence blood. If the heart and mind are not strong, one will easily be infected by the savagery, entering a state of uncontrolled violence that would likely lead to the descent into madness. Zhu Yuan's heart shivered, not daring to delay any further, as he began to refine the Genesis Beast Essence blood in accordance to the instruction in the 9 Dragons canon. Moonlight sprinkled onto the land. Zhu Yuan sat on the ground, faint bloody mist rising from his pores, before being blown away by the wind. According to the 9 Dragons canon, one needed to slowly whittle away the savageness inside the Genesis Beast Essence blood. Once this step was complete, one would be able to fuse the essence blood with one's own Genesis Chi. The fusion of the two would bestow one the ability to release extremely berserk Genesis Chi attacks. The most important factor for the whittling process was time Zhu Yuan was already prepared to spend. However, when he began to direct the Omnipython Chi, he discovered that every time his Genesis Chi neared the Genesis Beast Essence blood, the savage aura contained within seemed to be suppressed, as if it was faintly trembling in fear. After observing this phenomenon a few times, Zhu Yuan could not help but feel somewhat puzzled. It seems that the Omnipython Chi has a special suppressive effect on dragon-type Genesis Beast Essence blood, mumbled Zhu Yuan with uncertainty. The Omnipython Chi does originate from the ancestral dragon scripture, and contains a little of its primal aura. It is possible that this is why it has a suppressive effect on the dragon-type Genesis Beast Essence blood. Zhu Yuan's heart jumped slightly. If so, it would be much more convenient for him to whittle away the savageness in the essence blood. He immediately got to work, whittling away the savageness in the essence blood with his Genesis Chi. Sure enough, the originally untamable and violent essence blood feebly gave up most of its resistance, allowing the Omnipython Chi to swiftly neutralize the savageness contained within it. After an entire night, the essence blood in Zhu Yuan's body had grown much calmer. At this rate, he would be able to fully refine it in a few days. When that happened, he would have completed the initial step. A slightly pungent breath of air was puffed out from Zhu Yuan's nose as his tightly shut eyes slowly opened. A look of satisfaction flitted across them. The night had been much more fruitful than expected. He had originally been prepared to spend a long time on this process. Who could have expected that his Omnipython Chi would be an exceptional match for the 9 Dragons canon? I should be able to reach the first level of the 9 Dragons canon in 3 more days. Anticipation flashed in Zhu Yuan's eyes. He was itching to try the power of a high-grade Little Heaven Genesis technique. Zhu Yuan brushed his clothes and stood up. The moment he stood up, he saw 2 figures rapidly approaching from far away. When he concentrated, he saw that it was Xiao Xiao and Shen Wanjin. Both individuals were rushing towards his location, worried looks on their faces. Zhu Yuan frowned slightly as his figure moved, like mist as it drifted forward and landed in front of the 2. "What is it?" he asked. Upon seeing Zhu Yuan, Xiao Xiao panted a few times before looking towards Zhu Yuan with an ugly expression, as he said, "Lu Feng gathered many of the more highly ranked Outer Mountain disciples last night to fix the top 10 spots of the peak selection ceremony. He said that the Xingju disciples are going to take 8 of them. If we from the other continents want to compete, we can only fight for the last 2 spots. Whoever breaks this rule will become an enemy of all the Xingju disciples." Xiao Xiao's expression turned complicated as he gazed at Zhu Yuan. The Outer Mountains was currently in an uproar due to this news. Finally, he also said, "That you are the reason behind all of this." "I'm the reason, her." Zhu Yuan's eyes narrowed slightly after hearing what they had to say. Lu Feng was clearly doing this on purpose, his aim to make the other continent disciples resent Zhu Yuan. When that happened, he would not only have to face hostility from the Xingju disciples, but also the criticism of the disciples from the other continents. With unfriendliness from both sides, Zhu Yuan's situation would not be good. There's already some other continent disciples that have begun to complain. They feel that it's clearly a grudge between only you and Lu Feng, but it has now ended up implicating them. Xiao Xiao smiled bitterly. If this continued, Zhu Yuan would become highly criticized. A mocking look rose from the corners of Zhu Yuan's mouth as he said, "It's clearly Lu Feng who started this. What kind of logic is it to throw their complaints to me instead of him?" Although Lu Feng's tactics were underhanded, Zhu Yuan felt that the disciples who blamed him were even more stupid. Shen Wanjin's mouth pulled outwards as he said, "These guys only know how to bully the weak and fear the strong. They don't dare to voice their objections to Lu Feng, so they made up another reason to vent their frustrations." Lu Feng clearly knew that this would be the outcome, hence why he had acted so outrageously. After all, the title of the number 1 individual amongst the Outer Mountain disciples was a powerful deterrent force. Even though Zhu Yuan had defeated an Inner Mountain disciple in a Genesis technique match, he was still unable to compare to Lu Feng. Everyone felt Lu Feng was very likely to become a well-known figure of this batch in the Tsangshuan sect, and his future prospects were practically limitless. Hence, they would naturally not dare to offend him. Xiao Xiu nodded. However, quite a number of people have complaints against you, while even more are very angry at Lu Feng's overbearingness, but can't do anything about it. According to these rules of his, the Xingju disciples will be occupying 8 of the top 10 spots, leaving the rest of us to fight for the remaining 2. There are so many of us from the other continents. Can you imagine how wretched and desperate the situation will be? Zhu Yuan counter-asked, on what basis should we listen to him? Does the likes of him have the right to allocate these places? The top 10 spots of the peak selection ceremony should be contested based on one's own strength. Who the hell did Lu Feng think he was, and how thick-skinned was he to think he could decide on how they should be split? Xiao Xiu smiled bitterly. I've heard that the peak selection ceremony will be a free-for-all battle, while the quality of the Xingju disciples far surpasses the rest of us. Take the top 10 Outer Mountains disciples for example, a total of 7 are from the Xingju continent. Hence, when the time comes to vie for the top 10 spots of the peak selection ceremony, they will have the upper hand. What's more, they have Lu Feng, whom no one has been able to come close to. Now that he has even brought together the Xingju disciples to decide the allocation of the top 10 spots, whoever tries to touch those spots would have to face all of the Xingju disciples. In the face of this power, the disciples from the other continents are merely akin to a plate of scattered sand. Who would dare to object? After all, once the other party is provoked, they can easily join hands in the peak selection ceremony to make things difficult. Let alone the top 10, one might be hard-pressed to even obtain a decent ranking. Zhu Yuan indifferently remarked, in the end, it depends on whose fist is harder. He looked towards Xiao Xiu and Shen Wanjin as he continued, I do not know whether the others will acknowledge his allocation, but with regards to my ranking, I'm afraid that they don't have the qualifications. Moreover, I'm not interested in the other spots either, the only thing I want in the peak selection ceremony is first place. His tone was ordinary, but the words he spoke stunned Xiao Xiu and Shen Wanjin. There was no one who did not know that Lu Feng had already declared first place was his. In the face of his overwhelming might, no one dared to have any opinions. Hence, practically everyone felt that Lu Feng taking number 1 in his batch was already set in stone. Who could have expected Zhu Yuan to also declare he wanted first place? As such, would this not mean that he would have to compete with Lu Feng? Xiao Xiu swallowed, before he said, Junior brother Zhu Yuan. Lu Feng will not be easy to deal with. I suspect that he has already reached the 4th layer alpha origin. Most of the first-class disciples were at the 3rd layer, and Lu Feng was likely the only one who had reached the 4th. Zhu Yuan laughed in a carefree manner. Whether or not he's easy to deal with, I'll find out when we fight. He wanted to see how ugly Lu Feng would look when the first place he coveted so much was taken by Zhu Yuan in the peak selection ceremony. When that happened, would Lu Feng finally regret provoking Zhu Yuan? Lu Feng had repeatedly used various methods to make things difficult. If Zhu Yuan bet with all this without counter-attacking, he would not be Zhu Yuan. Upon hearing this, Xiao Xiu knew that Zhu Yuan had already made his decision. Looks like things were no longer going to be peaceful during the peak selection ceremony. However, Xiao Xiu felt a little apprehensive. Although no one had a good grasp of Zhu Yuan's abilities, the one he was facing this time was not the likes of Zhu Feng, but Lu Feng, a ruthless individual that was known to stand at the top of all the Outer Mountain disciples. Little Yuan bro, if you're really planning on vying for first place with Lu Feng, I advise you to cooperate with some of the other continent disciples. They have already been enraged by Lu Feng's overbearingness, and only lack someone to step up and take the lead. If little Yuan bro can get them on your side, you will not have to face the Xingju disciples alone. Shen Wanjin suddenly suggested. Xiao Xiu fell into thought for a while, before he said, I know some first-class disciples that are also unhappy with Lu Feng. They will be a considerable force if you manage to recruit them. Zhu Yuan fell silent some time. In the end, he nodded. Lu Feng had already gathered a huge group of Xingju disciples, an alarming powerful force indeed. Although Zhu Yuan did not feel that numbers meant victory, it was true that going alone would at times be more physically and mentally exhausting. If he could recruit these other continent disciples to his cause, he would not lose to Lu Feng in presence. When Xiao Xiu saw Zhu Yuan nod, he continued to speak again, however, all of them are elites amongst the Outer Mountain disciples, proud individual that will not easily submit to anyone. Without sufficient strength, it will be very difficult to convince them. Lu Feng had been able to become the leader of the Xingju disciples due to his strength. In contrast, there was no one amongst the other continent disciples like him who could sweep away everyone else with power. This led to the current situation in the outer mountains. The other continent disciples formed their various groups and factions. Though they may seem to have the advantage due to their superior numbers, they were completely unable to match the Xingju disciples. Qiao Xiu intended to caution Zhu Yuan. After all, the former was worried that Zhu Yuan would be unable to control the situation after recruiting these proud and untamable individuals. If the situation turned into a farce, Zhu Yuan would lose all face. Who amongst those who could come to the Zhangshuan sect was not a prided genius? Everyone was full of pride, making it an uphill task to make them all voluntarily acknowledge a single person. At the very least, such a person had never appeared during the past 2 months. Zhu Yuan naturally understood this. He softly chuckled and said, "Senior brother Qiao Xiu need not worry. You only need to call them over, and I'll handle the rest." With these words from Zhu Yuan, there was nothing much for Qiao Xiu to say, and he could only nod. "We'll depend on junior brother Zhu Yuan's methods when the time comes." Qiao Xiu was very efficient. By the time afternoon arrived, he had already invited over all of the outstanding individuals from other continents amongst the current batch of Outer Mountain disciples. In a certain little house by the mountain creek, Zhu Yuan was seated on a rock, a dozen youthful figures seated before him. Robust Genesis chi spread from these figures, every action and gesture they made filled with a certain aura of pride. Most of the individuals whom had been invited were after all elites amongst the first-class disciples. They were normally surrounded by many of their peers, enjoying the feeling the world seemingly revolving around them. Hence, it was natural that they did not lack pride. Especially the 2 figures at the very front, a young man and woman. The young lady wore a long dark cyan dress, her fine black hair reaching all the way to her waist. Her face was pretty, and her skin white as snow. She was called Song Wanshi, and was quite well known amongst the Outer Mountain disciples. Due to her good looks, she had many admirers. The male wore long gold robes, his hair scattered behind him. His wild-looking face gave off a proud aura. He was known as Zhao Kuan. These 2 were also ranked amongst the top 10 Outer Mountain disciples, and could be said to be one of the rare few from the other continents that were able to vie with the Xingju disciples. Song Wanshi appeared calm, though her eyes would covertly sweep towards Zhu Yuan to examine him. Zhao Kuan, on the other hand, was even more unbridled, his gaze uncourteously sizing up Zhu Yuan, as if trying to discover the latter's bottom line. Song Wanshi inquired in a soft and gentle voice, "May I ask why junior brother Zhu Yuan has gotten Qiao Xiu to gather us here?" The numerous disciples present cast their gazes over. If it was 2 months prior, not a single one of them would have answered Zhu Yuan's call. However, Zhu Yuan's reputation had recently rose, making no one dare to underestimate him. Thus, they had decided to come here out of respect after listening to Qiao Xiu's words. Zhu Yuan's expression was calm as he gazed upon the group. There was no beating about the bush as he said, "I believe everyone has already heard of how Lu Feng intends to divide the top 10 spots in the peak selection ceremony." Everyone could not help but frown slightly upon hearing this. Zhao Kuan let out an icy chuckle. "This matter may even be related to junior brother Zhu Yuan. Are you trying to say that if there was no feud between me and Lu Feng, he would put up with you guys?" Zhu Yuan's eyes hardened slightly as he looked towards Zhao Kuan, and said in a cold voice, "Hoping for others be more lenient and give you some scraps. Is this all your dignity is worth?" By the side, Qiao Xiu and Shen Wanjin were alarmed, not expecting Zhu Yuan's words to be so sharp even at the start. Sure enough, the numerous disciples present began to buzz angrily, rage filling their eyes as they looked towards Zhu Yuan. Their proud selves were evidently unable to accept Zhu Yuan's words. Zhao Kuan's complexion turned green with anger as he gnashed his teeth and said, "You do have a way with words, why not go reason with Lu Feng?" A trace of unhappiness could also be seen on Song Wanshi's pretty face as she said, "Junior brother Zhu Yuan, you should also know how powerful Lu Feng is. What else can we do but be accommodating? If you asked us here only to humiliate us, then we will not accompany any further." Zhu Yuan's eyelids lowered slightly as he looked towards the indignant crowd and said, "Looks like you guys still have a bit of fight in you. If not, it would have been meaningless to gather you." He shook his head, looking directly at them as he cut straight to the point. I've asked all of you here to tell you that I intend to contest for first place with Lu Feng in the peak selection ceremony. If you guys don't plan on struggling for those two pathetic spots, listen to my instructions when the time comes. Xiao Xiu grabbed his face. Zhu Yuan's words were way too direct. It seemed as if he had no plans of trying to properly talk things out. Sure enough, the numerous disciples looked to each other, before sniggers began to emerge. What shameless boasting! A first layer like you intends to vie for first place with Lu Feng. Zhao Kuan was the first to lose control. How much did your arrogance swell after defeating Zhu Yu in a Genesis technique match? Naive time is pressing for me, so I'm afraid that I can't afford to entertain your delusions any longer. Zhao Kuan coldly snorted as he stood up, intending to leave. Song Wanshi also shook her head. Zhu Yuan seemed to be way too arrogant. There was only indifference on Zhu Yuan's face as he watched Zhao Kuan stand up. The former knew that words were useless with these proud and unyielding fellows. The only way for them to submit was to beat them till they were convinced. Hence, he immediately said, "Receive a strike from me and I will apologize right here, right now." Arrogant. Zhao Kuan's eyes widened as he laughed in anger. Rumble. However, Zhu Yuan could no longer be bothered to speak. He formed a seal with one hand, before his palm suddenly flew forth. Vigorous Genesis chi abruptly erupted, akin to a flood of gold as it roared out from Zhu Yuan's palm. When it surged out, it seemed to turn into a giant lizard covered in dragon scales that released a dragon-like roar. An extremely alarming aura violently unfurled. This palm strike had clearly been imbued with the 9 dragons canon. The Genesis chi faintly shaped like a giant lizard was the dragon-type Genesis beast essence blood Zhu Yuan refined. However, it appeared somewhat indistinct, because he had yet to fully refine it. Even so, the strike was imposingly powerful, tearing apart even the ground itself. A ferocious aura pounced towards Zhao Kuan, causing his expression to change drastically. It was as if a high-tier grade 4 Genesis beast was charging towards him, intending to trample him into the ground. He did not dare to delay. With a loud yell, Genesis chi also exploded from his body, the power of the third layer undoubtedly on full display. Boom. His foot slammed into the ground as his body shot forth like a flash of light, colliding with the roaring giant lizard made from Genesis chi. Wild winds devastated the surroundings, causing cracks to extend across the ground. Thump. Under the now stupefied gaze after gaze, the menacingly charging Zhao Kuan was blown away by the giant lizard a split second later. He heavily crashed into a wall of the mountain, causing cracks to fill the entire wall. The area around the mountain creek was deathly silent. Zhu Yuan was expressionless. With a wave of his sleeve, the giant Genesis chi lizard returned into his hand. Zhao Kuan fell from the mountain wall, and crashed into the ground as he spat out a mouthful of blood. He raised his head, shock and fear in his eyes as he looked towards Zhu Yuan, evidently never expecting his 3-layer strength to be incapable of receiving even a single blow from Zhu Yuan. Song Wanshi's red lips were slightly ajar, her full chest heaving slightly as she stared deeply at Zhu Yuan. "Is there anyone else who wants to leave?" Zhu Yuan's voice was shockingly calm. Silence. Everyone was silent, not daring to make any noise. The scrutiny from before had now completely vanished. One must know that Zhao Kuan was ranked 7th amongst the 10 great outer mountain disciples. However, even someone like him had been defeated in a single strike. How terrifyingly powerful did one have to be to achieve such a feat? They had believed that no matter how strong Zhu Yuan was, he would at most be a little stronger than them. Yet, the scene before their eyes made them understand how wrong they had been. "Are you guys going to listen now?" Zhu Yuan's gaze swept across them. Anyone who came into contact with it hurriedly lowered their heads in embarrassment. Song Wanshi's red lips parted slightly, and apologetically said, "We were blind earlier. I hope that junior brother Zhu Yuan does not blame us too much." Zhao Kuan wiped away the blood at the corner of his mouth. He was a straightforward person, so after being utterly defeated by Zhu Yuan, he did not leave, but instead returned and sat down again. "You're good, and I was the one who was blind earlier. Go ahead and let us know what should be done." The strength Zhu Yuan displayed had subdued them, causing certain thoughts to rise in their minds. Perhaps Zhu Yuan did have the power to contend against Lu Feng. Xiao Xiu secretly breathed a sigh of relief. All of these guys were indeed miserable bastards. When words were used, they refused to listen, and only after being beaten did they submit. Zhu Yuan glanced at Zhao Kuan and said, "First, we will not accept their suggestion of leaving us only 2 of the top 10 spots." Everyone exchanged a look. Of course they did not want to accept it, but what do we do about Lu Feng? He said we have to go find him if we have any objections. Asked someone. Zhu Yuan's expression was uncaring. Who does he think he is? Spread the word that we want 6 of the top 10 spots. The Xingju disciples can only have 4. Cold sweat emerged on the heads of Zhao Kuan and the rest, even Song Wanxi's lips stretched slightly taut as she forced a smile. "I'm afraid Lu Feng will not agree." Zhu Yuan offhandedly said, "If they disagree, we'll see which of us is more skilled in the peak selection ceremony." Someone weakly said, "With regards to quality, the Xingju disciples are indeed a little stronger than us. I'm afraid that we won't be able to do much." Zhu Yuan's gaze swept across the group as he said. Song Wanxi, Zhao Kuan and the rest's eyes could not help but brighten. They knew that Zhu Yuan seemed to be astonishingly talented in practicing Genesis techniques. If they had his guidance, they may even raise their strength to the next level. In return, all of you have to listen to me during the peak selection ceremony. Whoever I direct you guys at, you guys will go and beat up. Any objections? Zhu Yuan slowly said. This time, everyone nodded one after another, their eyes filled with burning excitement. At the rear, Xiao Xiao and Shen Wanjin inwardly sighed in admiration upon seeing this. This was truly a beautiful move from Zhu Yuan. First intimidate them like a blast of thunder, before dangling a carrot in front of their eyes. All of these normally untamable elite disciples were immediately subdued into obedience. As such, Zhu Yuan had suddenly changed from a lone ranger to an existence that was now able to match Lu Feng's gang of Xingju disciples. Xiao Xiao licked his lips as a fire began to burn in his eyes. All of a sudden, the peak selection ceremony in a month was going to be an electrifyingly exciting event. News of Zhu Yuan recruiting elite disciples from the other continents swiftly spread in the outer mountains, undoubtedly causing a giant wave to rise. Of course, the declaration Zhu Yuan made next was even more shocking. Out of the top 10 spots, the non-Xingju disciples would take 6, while the Xingju disciples shall have the remaining 4. These words were akin to the impetus for a volcanic eruption, numerous Xingju disciples openly mocking them. Ha ha, this is the joke of the century. Ever since that Sangshuan sect was founded, there has never been less than 5 Xingju disciples amongst the top 10 in the peak selection ceremony. Such shameless bragging from Zhu Yuan. Who does he think he is? Can't imagine how he dares to allocate the top 10 spots. Looks like he's lost his mind. Does he believe his senior brother Lu Feng? We Xingju disciples are blessed by the heavens, and should naturally enjoy better treatment. Who does Zhu Yuan think he is? I heard that he even plans on vying for first place with senior brother Lu Feng. What a joke. It seems that defeating Zhu Feng and obtaining victory over Zhu Yu in the Genesis technique match has given him the impression that there's no one capable amongst us Xingju disciples. How cocky. Let's see how he'll take responsibility for his words this time. Truly a fool who doesn't know the immensity of the heavens. The outer mountains descended into boiling anger, a tsunami of opposition exploding from the Xingju disciples, as if they had been greatly humiliated. In response to the enormous ruckus, even more non-Xingju disciples inwardly curled their lips. Where was all this self-righteousness when you guys decided that you would be taking 8 of the top 10 spots and leave 2 for us as charity? Now that someone had finally stood up amongst the non-Xingju disciples, these guys were acting as if they had been utterly humiliated and would never let this matter drop. Hence, many non-Xingju disciples secretly applauded Zhu Yuan's decision to bravely step forward. Although they did not know why he dared to so openly face Lu Feng, it was better than before, when everyone was so afraid of Lu Feng that no one had the courage to even raise his or her head. However, they did feel somewhat awkward. This matter would certainly draw violent backlash from the Xingju disciples, backlash that they did not know whether Zhu Yuan would be able to deal with. If he failed, his bold declaration would only turn into a joke, making them have to bow their heads even lower in front of the proud Xingju disciples. Genesis Mountain. The training sessions here were not missed by a single outer mountain disciple, with the exception of Yao Yao. However, there was something different about the atmosphere today, a faint hint of tenseness and hostility in the air. Countless gazes sneaked glances towards a certain spot near the peak, where Zhu Yuan was seated on his cultivation platform, with his eyes closed, no hint of any other emotion on his calm face. Many gazes also looked towards another cultivation platform nearby, where dressed entirely in white, was Lu Feng, an equally nonchalant look on his face. The atmosphere covering Genesis Mountain was strangely tense. This lasted for a long time, before a figure suddenly stood up. It was a young man with fierce eyes, vigorous Genesis chi pulsing around his body. It was Qin Jin. He was not some unknown individual, but the number 6 amongst the 10 great Outer Mountain disciples. He looked towards Zhu Yuan with hostility, before lifting his leg as he began stomping menacingly towards the latter. Figure after figure also stood up, following behind him. Their eyes were filled with toying looks as they gazed towards Zhu Yuan. A dozen figures soon gathered. All of them were first-class disciples, while also from the Xingzhou continent. Any one of them was usually objected to admiration and respect. When all of them were gathered together, they became a force that was exceptionally intimidating. The expressions of several non-Xingzhou disciples changed slightly, feeling somewhat nervous. From the looks of it, these Xingzhou disciples were going to cause trouble for Zhu Yuan. That's Qin Jin, ranked 6 amongst the Outer Mountain disciples. Do you see the silver-haired young man beside him? That's Lei Hongtao, an even more formidable character that's ranked 4th amongst the Outer Mountain disciples. The others are no ordinary individuals too. It seems that they don't have friendly intentions. Numerous whispers spread, as every gaze on Genesis Mountain shifted over. When Lei Hongtao, Qin Jin and the rest menacingly walked towards Zhu Yuan, the expressions of Qiao Xiu, Zhao Kuan, Song Wanshi and Gang changed slightly. How could they not know what the other party was up to? Their gazes immediately converged, and a split second later, figure after figure stood up and gathered behind the trio, before moving to stand in front of Zhu Yuan. Countless gazes watched the two parties that were about to collide, their hearts jumping erratically in their chests. These two groups were basically composed of the elites amongst this batch of Outer Mountain disciples. If they were to clash, it would be an earth-shaking event. Lei Hongtao, Qin Jin, what are you guys planning on doing? Asked Qiao Xiu in a low voice. Qiao Xiu, Zhao Kuan, scram. There was an ominous look in Qin Jin's eyes, no trace of any civility in his words. Powerful Genesis chi burst from his body as a suffocating pressure spread. Qin Jin, do you think I'm made from mud? Zhao Kuan was also a proud individual. His eyes immediately hardened as he too stepped forward, violence brimming from his eyes as he looked towards Qin Jin. Oh, have your balls grown, Zhao Kuan? Do you really believe you've found a reliable backer? Qin Jin's tone was filled with ridicule. But the Zhao Kuan's gaze turned icy. Genesis chi swirled around his hands as they faintly expanded, undulations violently pulsing from them. By Qin Jin's side, the silver-haired youth called Lei Hongtao spoke up in an indifferent voice. Zhao Kuan, this matter does not concern you guys. I advise you to open your eyes a little wider, and not be so easily tricked by others. There are some people who have no ability, but wield their tongues with impeccable finesse. His gaze seemed to sweep to the back, where Zhu Yuan was seated, clearly putting no effort to conceal the disdain within them. Song Wanshi's lips opened slightly as she calmly said, what we do is our own business. There's no need for senior brother Lei's concern. Lei Hongtao coldly snorted. Junior sister Song, in our previous bout, your Black Yin scripture really caught me off guard. However, I've now mastered the Red Yang law, so feel free to come at me again. Song Wanshi frowned a little upon hearing this. She naturally knew that the Red Yang law just so happened to counter the Black Yin scripture she practiced. Qin Jin coldly chuckled, no longer bothering with them as his gaze looked straight towards Zhu Yuan. Zhu Yuan, didn't you say that we Xingzhou disciples can only occupy 4 of the top 10 spots? We're here to find out what right you have to say such things. His expression turned serious as he stepped forward, his thunderous voice rumbling across the entire Genesis Mountain. So get your ass over here. If you don't give us an explanation today, you will not be able to walk out of Genesis Mountain. This video will end here.